Hey everybody, Jamin here from Game Show. I'm not in New York City, I'm actually in San Francisco, and then I'm going to head up to Portland for XOXO, which is an amazing conference, festival, happening thing that you should absolutely check out. I'll link to it in the description. If you're there, come say hello to me. So the big news this week is that after years and years of rumors, Apple is finally making another play at a lucrative, elusive, and crazy attempt at console gaming. So the news came, you probably saw this week, via a keynote event on Wednesday, when the world's most profitable company made this announcement that they would be revamping Apple TV with a major hardware upgrade. So the Apple TV is a set-top box that lets you stream television and movies and look at photo slideshows of safari animals on your television, like many other set-top boxes. Only now the App Store is incorporated, which opens the door for, drumroll please, games. You know, unlike a lot of other people who ragged on it, like Kotaku called it a major bust, and The New Yorker, of all people, said it was an anachronism, I'm pretty optimistic about this little black machine. The big reason why is I think it would be great for mid-tier games like Transistor, which they showed at the conference, or Kentucky Route Zero, or Binding of Isaac, games that don't necessarily need a tricked-out, overclocked PC. But it stands, but as it stands, you don't necessarily need a pricey new console, or even at a minimum like a really decent laptop in order to play them. There are two things that I'm super interested to see if Apple can deliver on. The first thing that I'm looking forward to is how the App Store will be integrated into the OS, because they haven't really shown this yet. And I'm really interested. I'm really interested to see if Apple will use curation tools that they've developed for services like Apple Music to put games in front of people who want to play them. Apple Music is very good for this, and if you poked around in the App Store recommended games lately, it's got this nice, clean ecosystem that's fairly exhaustive and pretty good at guiding you towards games if you don't necessarily know what to play. Apple Music, I feel like, their big differentiating factor has been, the curation of radio, the ability to sort of like take things that people may not have heard and put them out into the public, and I feel like they could potentially do the same thing for games. So I think that this type of curatorial aspect from Apple's perspective is really important for these mid-tier games, as I was mentioning earlier. The average game designer makes less than $50,000 a year, and it can be very hard for struggling developers to advertise their game and get exposure, especially when they're competing against the marketing budgets of games like Call of Duty or Metal Gear, or certainly even on the App Store, looking at the dominance of games like Clash of Clans, Puzzles and Dragons, etc., etc. So as we've seen with recent events, developers of some pretty great games are really having trouble. They're facing financial straits, and we're not saying that these are small developers who are trying to become the next Notch or something like that. We're saying they're barely keeping the lights on, barely able to support themselves, even when they're getting outside support from government agencies and stuff like that. So, for example, the Belgian art house studio Tale of Tales came out and said that their game Sunset, a game that we've actually recommended, was a commercial failure. I think Apple TV could provide an ideal ecosystem for stuff like that, because those are exactly the types of games that people aren't necessarily going to find on the on their Xbox or PlayStation 4, but exactly the sort of thing that might be great for a very different audience, the kind of people who are interested in something like that for the Apple TV. The other thing that's really exciting to me is kind of like what happens next. So right now, Apple seems to be ever so tentatively dipping their toe into games in the living room. So the wand controller is designed for changing channels first, and playing games is a little bit of an afterthought. However, they do allow for third-party controllers that, are plain old industry standard gamepads. But here's the thing. Apple employs some of the finest industrial designers and UI designers in the world, and if Apple TV games are a big hit, I'm really hopeful that they would focus on doing a controller. There's this great profile, maybe not always a very flattering profile, of Jony Ive, Apple's chief design officer in The New Yorker. I'll link to it in the description. But the years of minuscule iteration that they go through to define all the little details of a product is really, really amazing. I'd love to see that kind of attention to detail applied to a game controller. Obviously, Microsoft and Sony spend a lot of time building their controllers as well, but those controllers are designed to do specific things. They are designed, there's a certain bias that's built into those types of controllers, and frankly, from a visual point of view, they don't share the same aesthetic that maybe Apple does. And so, I'm really wondering, what sorts of things ostensibly Apple could do with their own Jony Ive design controller. Another thing I wonder is what Apple could do with how we interact with games. So Apple is this company that's built on humanizing interactions with technology. So they didn't invent the mouse or the graphical interface, but rather those were ideas that were stolen from Xerox PARC. But what they did do was make it very friendly and usable. And that's kind of the problem with games, that controllers are often so complicated that people can't just pick them up and intuitively play. Just the other day, in an interview with Eurogamer that I'll link to in the description, Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, was talking about how the Mario series has been restrained because they worry that the controls will be too hard for people. So it'd be really cool to see an outside company like Apple, who specializes in design and interface, to see what they could come up with. It's also worth noting that Steve Jobs famously hated buttons. He was really against buttons. He wanted to have keyboards with no buttons. Obviously, the Apple mouse doesn't have buttons on it. So, obviously, you need buttons for, I guess you don't need buttons for a game controller, but I think that there are opportunities to try to create these amazing experiences that fit into the Apple design ethos, but also do really amazing things for games. But for now, we've got to settle for two-player Crossy Road, which, frankly, isn't a bad start. Anyway, I'd love to know what you think. Do you think that the games addition to Apple TV is going to be great or a total bust? Do you think it's going to open new doors for new audiences, or do you think it's going to be like the Pippin, which is a total disaster for Apple? Anyway, hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I will see you all next week. And if you're at XOXO, come say hello.